Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Lineup Lab. Week 2 on DraftKings is in the book, and we have someone who's won $1 million. And again, it's not me, but it is a professional. It is a really well-known professional who's a really great guy, really funny guy, named Al Smizzle, aka his real name is Al Seidenfeld. You might know Al from maybe watching him on ESPN, or he has a podcast that I really enjoy called the Daily Fantasy Football Edge that he does with Adam Levitan and Peter Jennings. I really enjoy that podcast, and they do game breakdowns every week, and I highly recommend it. You should give it a listen. And if you did this week, you probably would have heard him talk about some of these plays that he used in this lineup that ended up winning him big. So congrats to Al, and I'm excited because to look at a pros lineup for this lineup lab to break down this millionaire maker is exciting because I get to look at the plays he used and see what I agreed with, what I disagreed with, and go into why I think they're good or bad plays. And I think he made a lot of really great plays in this lineup. So the first thing is I'm just going to get out of the way some of the plays that I'm not really going to talk about. The first one is LeGarrette Blount. I like this play. I think this was a value play from Al, and I used Blount quite a bit. But just basically because of his price, it's not like this matchup was really sneaky good or anything. And he was only 4,000. Seemed like a good play. It paid off. David Johnson as well. He's just a really talented player. And it just probably was not priced high enough in the spot, especially because of his PPR ability. And I actually think Al got a little unlucky here because David Johnson ran a bad route or something and sort of got on the doghouse and was replaced by CJ Chris Johnson at the end of the game. So he probably could have had actually a bigger game. And the last one I'm not going to talk about is the Broncos D. Solid play. They're just a really good defense with sack potential. I think this wasn't like a sneaky play or anything that exciting, or there wasn't that much depth that went into it maybe. I think that this is just a play that a good amount of people were on, and I'm just not surprised he used him. So let me get into the plays that I like and want to get into why I like them. So first thing is, let's just get into the stack. So he used a Cam Newton, Kelvin Benjamin stack. And I think this was a pretty obvious one, but I did have a lot of people asking me on Daily Fantasy Winners and on Twitter about, oh man, like Cam, I know Carolina's favored by 14. They're projected for a big amount of points, but is he really worth paying up $7,900 for? And I think in general, actually, it's probably you want to lean on not paying up for quarterback on DraftKings because I'd rather go cheap and allow us to pay up at other positions. But I think this week, when you had such a good matchup, Cam was just so highly projected, in my opinion, that it made it worth it. And $7,900 actually isn't that expensive for someone of his skill. So why was this a good matchup? It's not just because San Francisco is a bad defense. That's actually the actual skill of the opposing defense is really about half of what a good matchup really is. The other half of it is actually the pace of play for that team's offense. And the reason that that's important is because if that team's offense has a really fast pace of play, that means that they're not going to be on the field very long, and that means that opposing offense is going to get a lot more plays and a lot more opportunities. And San Francisco obviously is a really high pace of play team because Chip Kelly's their coach. They run this super fast offense. And if we look at seconds per play, and I like to look at just for the first half, and this is just for week 1, but I like looking at this for just the first half. And the reason is because if we get into the second half, if a team gets up in the game, they're just going to play slower. So I don't think it's really indicative of anything here. But as you can see, New York Giants are number 1, and San Francisco was not far behind at number 2. So San Francisco is a really fast-paced team. And so throughout the season, they're going to continue to be a really good fantasy matchup just because that pace of play is going to give really great opportunity for those opposing offenses to get on the field a lot and to score a lot. But obviously this isn't going to come through every time. Just case in point, the New York Giants are actually a pretty fast-paced offense. They run no huddle quite a bit. But the Saints just totally ate it this week. So it's not something that's going to pay off every week, but it is something to definitely keep an eye on and is a really, really strong factor in a matchup. And that's why teams like the Washington Redskins, for example, they're really slow pace of play team, so they're not actually a great fantasy matchup despite their defense being pretty terrible. Same as the Dallas Cowboys are a pretty slow offense. There's a lot of slow offenses that sort of hide the poor player of their defense because of it. So I want to get into another play as well, and this is Marvin Jones, who I'm actually surprised got this high ownership. He got 9% ownership, and after just completely dudding in week 1. And I think this is a smart play by Al. My bet would be that he thought he was going to get less ownership than 9%. But the reason I like this play is if you watched my videos from week 1, you could see that I was analyzing passing targets. And I saw that Marvin Jones actually had 11 targets from that Lions passing game. And he just didn't catch that many balls. Now, I was worried that this might have been a skill factor, but in general, targets from week to week are going to be pretty predictive of whether or not someone's going to continue to get targeted in the passing games. And targets are kind of like expected value. You get targets, it usually means that's going to turn into production eventually. And that really did turn into production for Jones, who finally did catch a lot of those targets. I'm not sure how much he was targeted in this game. Maybe 10 times, something like that. He caught the ball 8 times, got that 100-yard bonus, got 120 yards, ended up being a really solid play that helped him win by only a couple points. So every player here in this lineup is really important. The third player I want to talk about is Travis Benjamin, who I really, really like this week, and clearly Al liked him as well. He was a player who, he came from a Cleveland offense. I thought he was kind of underrated coming into the season because he comes from a Cleveland offense that's not very good, and he had an 1,000-yard season, right? And that's with Josh McCown as QB. Now he has Phillip Rivers, who's a really good quarterback as his QB, and Rivers has 0 people to pass it to, basically. And if you watched my video last week as well, Benjamin was actually getting targeted in the red zone as well last week. He seemed like a really, really good play. Now, I didn't expect this production, but when you have a wide receiver who's pretty solid last year, not coming out of nowhere, has a better QB throwing to him, and that quarterback really doesn't have much else to throw to, this is a real good recipe for success. And I think that was his reasoning for using Gates as well, is, Rivers doesn't really have that many people to throw to. Gates was a pretty good fantasy tight end last season. I think I was looking this up earlier. In terms of fantasy points per game, he was actually 7th among tight ends. Pretty solid numbers. So with no one else to pass to, you would think that Gates would be more involved in the passing game and had a good chance of doing well. He only did catch 3 balls, but did get a receiving touchdown. But I do like these 2 plays just because of that situation, especially with a good quarterback. Sometimes you get situations where, oh, wow, there's no one else for this quarterback to throw to, but then you have a bad quarterback and those guys just don't produce. So I really like this Benjamin Gates play. But I think the irony of all of this was I actually don't really understand not using a river stack if we're going to use both Benjamin and Gates, because if both these guys are going to do well, it probably means Rivers is throwing them touchdown passes. So that's kind of a funny one. But if he ended up using a river stack, he probably would have paid up for someone besides Diggs or Jones or someone or LeGarrette Blount, and that might have actually cost him points this week because of the way it played out. So good thing you didn't do that, but I do think a river stack would have been better served here if you're using 2 receivers from the passing game. The last person I want to touch on is Stefon Diggs, and he wasn't someone that I was on very much, and it's sad because now the cat's totally out of the bag, and I missed something here. I definitely overlooked something here, and now he's not very hidden anymore, and that's too bad. But I think this is something to I don't know how useful will be at this point because, the thing is the reason why Diggs was a better play this week is something that just isn't going to apply to anyone anymore. But basically, in the same vein as Benjamin, Diggs actually went from a poor quarterback to improved quarterback. He went from Sean Hill, who's a really bad quarterback, passing him to him in week 1, to Sam Bradford, who I don't really think that much of, but is definitely a much better quarterback than Sean Hill. And he actually had a really good game that I just, kind of spaced out about in week 1 with 7 receptions on 9 targets with a bad quarterback throwing to him. He gets a better quarterback throwing to him. He's probably going to have a better game despite the fact that Green Bay and their number 1 corner was a really, really tough matchup. So clearly from week 1, you could see if someone's having this production with a bad quarterback that he probably is a pretty good player. And I might do a video later going into what else we could have looked at in week 1 that could have identified that Diggs was actually good. Or maybe there weren't any stats. We'll see. I'm going to try to put a video together. But the main overall point I'm trying to make is when you have a wide receiver who's going from bad QB play to mediocre good QB play, it's probably going to help that receiver quite a bit, which is obviously quite obvious, but something that you might overlook just because you don't think much about it, and I definitely overlooked it there. So, and Diggs obviously was the key to the night. He needed to have a big game, and he did, and it won him $1 million. So congrats to Al, and congrats on the million, and obviously I think this is a great lineup, and with some really great plays. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Tomorrow I'll be breaking down the Sunday Million winner and talk about what that person did good or bad, break down their plays. It's probably going to be a Cam Newton, Kelvin Benjamin stack as well. So I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, if you did enjoy it, please click the subscribe button and look for more of these videos later on in the week. Thanks again, guys.